Hey Scott here in today's video, which is a bit of a long one because it was a big process and I like to keep it all in one video together. A friend of mine asked me to take a look at his John Deere lawn tractor. It had a gas leak, which I fixed a gas leak, but when I got it in the shop I realized, there's an obvious oil leak on this engine somewhere, and so talked about it with him and he decided to go ahead and have me find the leak and fix the leak. And here is what I found and how I did it. So enjoy the show. Alright, so today we're looking at an LA 130 John Deere lawn tractor. This thing has a really nice V-twin Briggs engine in it, but as you could tell from the smoke that you just saw while it was running, there's a problem. So I think what's happening is there's an oil leak in there somewhere. My guess right now, off the top of my head, is a crankcase gasket is worn out, because I had to replace that on my own lawn tractor recently, and that was the problem. So what's happening is the oil is leaking out of the engine, getting onto the muffler while it's sitting unused, and then when it does get started and the muffler gets hot, then it just starts smoking. So we're going to clean this off with a little degreaser, engine degreaser, and then we're going to take a closer look and find out if we can see where the oil is coming from. Alright, we're just going to use this Walmart special here, engine degreaser. The engine is warm, so let's hose her down. In fact, I'm going to get this hood off if I can. Alright, I was able to just pull the hood off so we can get up in the front here a little bit. Might as well use up this whole can. Alright, now it says to let it sit for 5 minutes and hose it down. Alright, so as you can see, while my son was holding the phone, I just decided to break out the pressure washer and get this thing really cleaned up. So now we're gonna, I kind of actually took out my leaf blower too and kind of blew the water off of it. So now we're going to just kind of keep an eye on it, see if you can find an obvious place where it's leaking. If it doesn't present itself real soon, I'm actually going to fire the thing up and let it run, and keep an eye on it that way as well, because it's probably leaking more when it's running than when it's not. So looks like we got some water leaking right there yet, but got some towels, and we'll dry things up a little bit more and just keep an eye out for the leak. So when I see it, I'll turn the camera back on. Alright, so I had the engine running for several minutes, probably a good 20 minutes, while I put everything away. And there's still some stuff smoking off the hot surface there, but I'm not seeing quite yet any obvious sign of an oil leak. I was thinking maybe the crankcase. You see those bolts? Here, I'll show you right here. Those bolts there, that line right there. Okay, that's a crankcase gasket. I thought that might be the case, leaking from there, but not seeing anything yet. Hard to see under there. And nothing there either. So my next guess then would be way up underneath. It's a mess under there. So oil is getting obviously under there as well. And my thinking is the crank seal underneath the engine might be leaking. So either way, we're gonna have to pull this engine off, and I'm gonna replace that crank seal. And if something else comes up, I might even replace that crankcase gasket. So I'll let you know. Alright, so as we get ready to remove this engine from the tractor, we're going to start with marking the cables here. We've got down here a cable, and up here a cable. And I'm thinking that that's a throttle cable and that's a choke cable, but it doesn't matter. So because that one's already blue and that one's red, I happen to have a blue paint marker, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark either side of the cable so that when everything goes back together, I know what cable goes where and exactly what position it goes in. So, and then I've got a red paint pen. We're going to do the same thing here. I'm going to mark this one. There, give that a moment to dry, and I'll just unscrew and remove those cables. Alright, so these two screws require Torx, a T25 Torx. So let's loosen those up. A little bit more. Alright, so pull that cable out of place, and let's get the blue one. And they're pretty tight. My guess is the factory used Loctite. And then kind of pay attention to where this one is fed. It's fed behind the bracket for the fuel pump here. And this bottom one is fed through this plastic keeper or guide of some sort. So there we go. The cables are done. Now let's tackle the fuel line. Alright, so it doesn't really matter where we disconnect the fuel line. There's plenty of places to choose from. I'm just going to disconnect it from here and pull all of that out of there. So first thing I'm going to do is get my fuel line pincher, pinch it off, and then remove the clamp. And I think I better go and get my little pliers for that. Alright, so I got my fancy schmancy fuel line pliers from Knipex. Yes, that's how you say that. Okay, and so these things just kind of open up, pull this out, and again just set everything aside. We're getting closer. Let's go on the other side and look at the electrical. So now we want to disconnect the power cord to the starter there, and there's a couple other wires in there we're going to unplug. Alright, before we bother messing with the electrical disconnections down there, we're going to disconnect the negative terminal of the battery here. So it's typically a 7/16, but not always. Look at that. And I went ahead and accidentally touched the positive. So don't do that, you know. Trying to do this with one hand because I'm too lazy to go get my tripod. Alright, so the negative terminal has been disconnected. I'll just put the nut back on here so we don't lose it. And let's go back down here by the starter, and we can disconnect the starter. It looks like I got to get, I'm turning that, but the one in the back here is turning too, so I got to get 2 wrenches. Alright, so we're working on getting the power cable off the starter down here, and I got 2 7/16 wrenches. Now this particular one, I bought a cheap one and I ground it thin just for things like this. So I can get on this back one over here, and then I can hold that in place while I turn on the front one. There we go. Try it again. There we are. Snug that up again. And then we'll put the nut back on just so we don't misplace it. And now the starter's been disconnected. Now let's focus on the other electrical stuff. Just a couple of wires here to unplug. Let's see if we can make sense of this mess. So we've got this strap holding these up, so we're going to cut the strap there. And it looks like we just got one. We don't have to disconnect that because when we do this, oop, wrong way. Okay, just disconnect this. A little tricky because it's, there we go. Alright, so that's off the engine, and as far as I can tell, there's no other wires connected to this engine. This engine is now all released from everything on top. So now we're going to get underneath and take a look at that. And let's drain the oil while we're here. Hello there, what do I spy with my little eye? Looks like down here I see a puddle. Sure enough, that's not water. Where's it coming from? Looks like it might be coming from right around that bolt right there. Let me reach in, and that bolt right there is dripping with oil. So, yep, I think we found our leak. So, since we were taking the engine off anyway, to get to the seal underneath, we'll be tackling the crankcase gasket after all. Alright, so we took the deck off the lawn tractor, and now we've got the lawn tractor up on the hoist, and my dog is barking at somebody. But what we want to look at here, boy, kids going by, dog barking, sirens in the background. What a great time to shoot a video. So anyway, alright, so now we're going to take the PTO off. This happens to be a 5/8 inch socket, so let's pop this off. Alright. If you don't have an impact driver to do that, you have to figure out a way of maybe stopping the engine from turning, so good luck with that. So we've got the bolt out. And we should be able to just, there we go. Now we've got that wire on here, we're going to have to take that wire off. There we go. We got the P2 out of the way. Now we're looking at the pulley that's on the engine shaft. That's the drive. This belt is for the drive. So I should be able to pull it off. Oop. It's not coming loose, so I have to mess with it a little bit. Let's tap on it a little bit, see if we can get it. It's coming loose. I'm sure it's never been off this machine before. I'm going to get a pliers and start twisting it a little bit. My goodness. I'd have to get up here and pry on something. Oh, I don't want to pry on that. I just realized we don't want to bend that pulley. So maybe not pry. Well, one way or the other, this has to come off of here. Oh, and there it is. Just had to tap on it a little bit. I guess a lot more. So anyway, now the engine is only held in place by 4 bolts. The 4 bolts there, 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 and there. Once we get those 4 bolts out, the engine should come free. Alright, so those are 5/8 head. So let's see if my Milwaukee can take it off. That's one, and we just dropped it in there. We'll get that back. 2, 3, 4, and this bracket came off too. So anyway, now the engine should be free. Let's put the tractor back on the ground and see how we did. All right, so on the top of the engine, I got the 4 bolts off. One more thing to do, and this is the muffler right here, and I got to take this bracket off, and sometimes those pipes will just lift right out once I move this bracket off. Let's see if we can get that done. Found the first 10mm bolts on this thing. All right, let's see if we can't get lucky and just lift that engine off. There it is, nice. So what I've got here is just a temporary table set up, and I got this big galvanized tray. And I took some 2x6s and basically made a block. So when I set an engine on there, I just kind of put the shaft inside the block, and I can work on it like that. So, all right, now we'll go order some parts, see what's going on. All right, so here with the engine on the workbench, we've got it upside down. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start taking this crankcase cover off. And one thing we have to do is to remove the clamp from the governor shaft here. So we'll do that. And then we'll have to just kind of clean this up a little bit. And we're going to be removing all these bolts. There's a bunch of bolts all the way around. So let's get to it. Alright, so with a 7/16 wrench, we're going to loosen up this this bolt here, this nut. Now we're going to see if we can, there you go, just push this off. It was moving a little bit. There we go. Just kind of let that hang there. And then we're going to start taking these bolts out. Alright, now we got a 1/2-inch socket, and we'll start taking these bolts out. We're dropping them right into the carburetor area, so get those up before we're done. Alright, looks like we got them all. And now we're just going to be able to lift this off. There are a couple of spots on the outside edges you could tap on lightly with a hammer to help raise it up, but let's see what happens here. No, I can't do it by hand. It's not that loose, so we're going to tap on it with a hammer. Got a little rubber hammer here. You'll see the gasket is broken, and that's why we had leaks. So, alright, now we're going to get this all cleaned up and get it all back together. Alright, so one thing that fell out when we pulled that cover off was this bit. This is a part of the oil pump, so it fell down into here, and I recovered it with a magnet. But hang on to that, you're going to need that. Alright, so I am going to very, very carefully take a single edge razor blade and start working my way around this old gasket. And I say careful because you don't want to mess up the surface of the aluminum. So just be nice and gentle and clean that stuff off. Pull the oil spout out. Also, there are these metal pegs here. Make sure that those pegs are intact. They might have come out on the crankcase cover right here. Just make sure you don't lose those. Just nice and gentle. Now, a better tool for this would be actually a gasket scraper, but I've looked high and dry and I can't seem to find my gasket scraper. So another option would be a chisel like this, a nice sharp chisel. But just whatever you decide to use, be very, very careful here. So I'll finish this up and get back to you. Alright, pretty good. Let's get oil out of this thing. Alright, so here's a Fluid Evacuator. See, it says right on it, Fluid Evacuator Plus. This is what I'm going to be using to drain the, get the oil, the last bit of oil out of that crankcase before we put the gasket on. This thing is really handy to have, although if you don't do this kind of work on a regular basis, it's probably not worth it. This one was about $100 when I bought it several years ago, and I'm sure it's more now. So anyway, that's what we'll be using. Little by little, we're making progress here. I'm sure I could have just picked the thing up and tipped it out, but the Fluid Evacuator is working. There we go. All right, we'll get in there with a rag and mop up the rest of it. Make sure there's no pieces of the old gasket or anything in there. This is pretty good. When I scraped out the gasket, I made sure to scrape away and clean it up as I went. Alright, that's looking pretty good. Clean up around the crank here a little bit. Keep particles from falling in. Now while I'm in here, I'm going to show you. This is the cam. If you ever, you don't have to take this out on this project, but if you ever do, there's a mark on the cam right here, and there's a mark on the tooth of the main crankshaft right here. So if you ever have to take this out and you put it back together, you have to make sure that that mark and this mark line up when you put everything back in together. So, and over here, this is the governor. So, all right, got that all cleaned up. Now let's take a look at the crankcase cover and clean that up too. All right, so here we're looking at the crankcase cover itself, and as you can see, we're going to be cleaning up the gasket here. But if you take a look right here, this gasket, I'm sure this is where it was leaking mainly, because you can see how this gasket was pushed out of place, probably when they assembled the engine at the factory, and it's crushed and it doesn't cover up the edge here. So, or maybe not at the factory, maybe it just happened over the years, I don't know. But in either case, I'm sure that's where it was leaking the worst. So we'll clean this up and get this ready as well. Another thing that we're going to do is flip it upside down, and I'll show you when the time comes what we're doing there. Alright, so I've got the gasket all cleaned up off the other side, and I flipped it over. Now I'm going to have to clean this up a little bit, but we want to take this off. This is where the oil pump is, and then we're going to be replacing the oil seal right here as long as we got this thing apart. So let's take this off. Well, let me clean this up and then we'll get back to you. Alright, now we got it cleaned up a little bit. We're going to take these 3 bolts out. They're 5/16. Inside here is our oil pump, and the part that I pulled earlier out right here, that will be a part of this. So take all these parts out, set them aside. Come on now. There's lane in there. They're just slick from the oil. There we go. Take these parts out, set them aside, and then there is an O-ring in here. If that comes out, just kind of look it over, make sure it's still in good shape. We're going to leave it there for now. And then we're going to take this oil seal off here like I mentioned earlier. Take a good stout screwdriver. There's the old oil seal. So we got a new one of those. All right, I'm going to clean this up a little bit more. We'll get back to you, put it back together. All right, so now we're going to focus on putting the new oil seal back in. And right now, is this going to be upside down? Anyway, this is the oil seal we're putting back in. You see it's part number 795387. And this is what it looks like. You can see I got it from Parts Tree. And that's the package. There's a new oil seal. Now we're gonna inside here. There's a spring, and so when we put the cover back on, we're gonna be careful of not messing up that spring. But for now, what we need to do is we need to set this in there and press it down. So I'm gonna get a little oil and lube that up. I'm going to start very gently tapping it in place. Alright, so it's flush here, but it needs to sit down in a lip that's inside here, and I'm going to get something to help push it down against that lip. So we got just a kind of a flat punch here, and we'll just work our way around. Getting really close if we're not already there. Yep, just heard the sound change. I think we're there. Yeah, more solid sounding. We're there. All right, very cool. All right, now let's get the gasket on the engine block. All right, so now we're going to put the actual gasket on the engine here, and then we're going to lube up the parts here with some engine lube. Let's get to her. Now these two pins right here help make sure that you put the gasket is held in place while you do this. And the new gasket has been beefed up. It's a lot thicker here and a lot thicker here. And just kind of lay it in place, and yeah, don't get any schmutz on there. Alright, I'm going to take some of this lube and we're going to lube up this shaft here. Now, I want to mention one last thing before I forget. This here is the governor control arm, and when we assemble it, we want to know that it's gonna, from this angle, it's gonna crank clockwise. So I'm gonna do a little Terrell fix it all trick, and I'm gonna get a marker and mark that that direction. Alright, so there we go. We put an arrow pointing clockwise. Alright. Alright, so let's put this on. Now, as we get to the seal here, we want to make sure we don't accidentally fold up the rubber flaps. So we're gently going to work our way around with a small screwdriver and make sure that that doesn't get bent. Can't tell if it's going down or not. I think it is a little bit. But we're just going to be ever so gentle. There she goes. Oh, nice and clean. Alright, so the new gasket came with replacement bolts. So I got a little bit of Loctite on there. And also came with these instructions. It says here to, they recommend using a thread chaser to clean any thread locking agent out of the bolts. So I cleaned everything thoroughly, put everything back in place. We're going to hand start the bolts, and then the diagram shows the order of how you should tighten them. Like for example, you tighten this one up about, let's see, 1/3 of the way, and ultimately we want to get to the final torque value of 325 inch-pounds. That's not foot-pounds, that's inch-pounds. So we're going to tighten this one. And then we're going to jump over to this one, and then over to 3, and then 4, and then 5, and then 6, and so on and so forth, until we get them all tight in that order. Alright, so as we start getting these bolts in place, and what we're going to do is when we start, Again, we get a 1/2 inch socket. We're going to kind of go backwards with them. And you'll hear that click. Okay, that's the threads lining up. Once we hear the click, then we can start going forward and know that we're not cross threading. So we're going to do that to each one, get them all started. And there is, like I mentioned before, there's a thread lock on here, so that's going to provide a little resistance. You'll feel that when you do this. So you know, I don't have a very, this is a kind of, I was told this is called the speed wrench anyway. I don't use it too often, but you know, over there at Terrell's channel, Terrell Fixes All, he uses one of these to do this, get these bolts started, and it just seemed like a good excuse for me to break out my own speed wrench. So thanks for the tip, Terrell. Alright, now we're going to start getting them all a little bit further in. Just going to tighten them till they stop. Alright, now that they've gotten kind of right down all the threads, and now we're going to start tightening them according to the instructions here, just a little bit at a time, until eventually we're going to work our way up to 325 inch-pounds. Alright, so I've got my torque wrench here, and I'm going to start torquing these bolts down. And it says, the instructions say torque it to 325 inch-pounds. This, however, has foot-pounds on it, not inch-pounds. And the way we want to convert it to, if you want to take our inch-pounds, which is 325, and divide it by 12, that will give us foot-pounds. So 325 divided by 12 is roughly 27, you know, 0.08 something or other, but 27 foot-pounds is what we're after. But to start with, I'm just going to set this at 10. Right about there, and let's do that. Starting with number 1. Alright, to number 2. I think it's over here. There we go. 3 is over here. 4 is over here. 5 is up here. And 6. 7. 8. 9 is at the very top. Alright, they're all done now up to 10 foot-pounds. So now I'm going to increase this to about 20 foot-pounds and do it again. Alright, and we'll start again. That didn't take much. Alright, let's go the rest of the way up to 27, maybe even 20, 28. Let's see, there's 25, 27. Let's just go 28. Close enough for government work. And there we go. They're all tight. Alright, so now we're going to put the oil pump back into place. You take this piece that we took out earlier, and it doesn't matter which way you drop it in. Lower it down in there, turn it till it drops. There you go. And then we get to play puzzle pieces with these things. It doesn't seem to make a difference there either, so it's just there you go. Down there. We take the cover, you can see which side was down, and make sure there's no schmutz on here. Line these up. And it's 5/16. And that's all ready to go. So now, let's get this governor back in place. Alright, so now we're going to put the governor linkage back on. And if you recall, we put the arrow on here to show which direction that was going to go in. Now we're going to take that marker and draw the same thing on here, showing which direction. Again, thanks to Terrell for that tip. I'm going to put these back on here. And for now, we're just going to leave that loose until we get this engine back in place. Alright, now it's time to put the engine back on the tractor where it belongs. Alright, now we're going to get up underneath and get the engine mounting bolts on there. And what we can do right away here is there's a shield, a heat shield on top. We can put that back in place. That actually will hold the engine kind of in place until we get those bolts underneath, because I know that when I loosened the bolts and the tractor was tipped way up in the air, the engine didn't move, and it was actually that heat shield holding the muffler pipes that was holding the whole engine in place. So we're good to go. Let's get it up in the air. Oh, doggy. Alright, so with the tractor up in the air now, we can see the mounting holes, and the engine might be able to wiggle around a little bit to get each bolt started, but we're going to just get each one started before we tighten anything up. So far so good. That was a little bit snug. Let's try the other hole. Yep. Okay, Alright, it's going in good there. Make sure it's not cross-threaded. There we go, nice and easy. Alright, so we'll tighten this up. While I'm under here, I'm going to replace the drive belt because I found damage on the drive belt and I got a new one. Snug them up real tight. All right, good and tight. All right, so even though I put the 4 bolts to mount the engine on here, I forgot about something. When we put the pulley back on, there's this bracket that also holds the belt in place, and this bracket is held on by those 2 bolts on top. So I'll have to remove those. And then we're going to grab the drive belt here. I replaced the drive belt while we were at this. That was a whole nother project. There we go. And now we're going to put the bracket on. And so start tightening this up. Want to make sure it's not cross-threaded. All right, that one's good. That one's good. And now we'll get some power on here. All right, move on to the next step. Let's get this PTO back on. All right, so now it's time to put the electric PTO back on. I cleaned it all up. As you probably saw when I took it off, it was a mess. So we got the wire here for it. You can plug that in, just simple. And now there's this bracket right here that's going to go into this hole right there. So there's also a keyway right here and in there, and they have to line up as well. So let's get this all. Got the bolt, let's get that out of the way. Line up. Just kind of eyeball it. I'm turning on the bottom here to get the keyway to line up there. That should be about it. There we go, and then make sure that this bracket goes into that slot right there. There we go. So this is in there. This is on the keyway. Let me take our bolt. We tighten her down. What size is that? So it's a 5/8. Snug it up pretty good. Now that's going to turn the engine over. So I'm going to get an impact driver on there, just tighten it up just a smidge more. If you don't have an impact driver to do this, you can maybe put a vice grip or a pliers or something on the crank in the back here. It's a little tricky. There's a couple of different ways to do that. But I recommend having a torque wrench. Excuse me, impact driver. Alright, that's going to be good enough. Now let's get it back on the ground, get that engine hooked up again on top, get some fresh oil in it and fire it up. And let's start getting the engine plugged all back in. This is that's for the headlights. We've got a bank here, some wires, and here. Plug those back in together. They only go one way. Okay, those are plugged in. Make sure they're good and tight. And then we got to get the cable for the starter here. And just double check, make sure your battery up here, the negative is still disconnected, so that'll be the last thing we do. Put this cable on the starter. And just like when I took it off, I've got 7/16" wrench. This one is one that I ground flatter. So we're going to use that one to hold that back nut while we tighten this one, because we don't want that back one to be turning while we're doing this. Could damage the starter that way. So just snug it up. There we go. Now we'll go on the other side or on the front and we'll hook up some cables. And let's start getting the engine plugged all back in. This is that's for the headlights. We've got a bank here, some wires, and here. Plug those back in together. They only go one way. Okay, those are plugged in. Make sure they're good and tight. And then we got to get the cable for the starter here. And just double check, make sure your battery up here, the negative is still disconnected, so that'll be the last thing we do. Put this cable on the starter. And just like when I took it off, I've got 7/16" wrench. This one is one that I ground flatter. So we're going to use that one to hold that back nut while we tighten this one, because we don't want that back one to be turning while we're doing this. Could damage the starter that way. So just snug it up. There we go. Now we'll go on the other side or on the front and we'll hook up some cables. Alright, let's bring the cables here. We've got one that we marked with red, one that we marked with blue. Let's get the blue one here. That would be, we'll feed it back behind here. Go. And we got here as just a T25 Torx driver. We'll line up the blue marks like we drew when we disconnected this thing. Okay, and let me see. That's the choke cable. And now the cable down below is going to be the throttle cable. Line up the red marks. Now let's tighten this up a little bit. And that's the throttle cable. Alright, so while we're here, you need to take a look at the governor arm. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this heat shield back off because we need to access the governor down below here. So just get this off temporarily and show you how to set that up. I'll say. Alright, so with the throttle down there with the red marks in the full throttle position, if you get underneath here, see the arrow on the on that arm there? What we're going to do is we're going to turn that rod all the way in the clockwise position, and then holding that in place, then we're going to tighten up this nut there. All right, so we got a 1/4 inch socket, and a 1/4 inch socket will fit right on there. And you see, there's not a lot of turn, so we're going to keep it in the full clockwise position, and then the nut on the back side is 7/16. So I'm going to tighten that up. Okay, so let's see if I can get in there with a socket. Alright, make sure that this is turned clockwise, and we're going to tighten that nut. There we go. Snug it down. Alright, now our governor is set in the correct spot. So now let's get over on the other side, hook up the fuel line. Alright, so over here we've got the fuel line, and we just took it from here. Get that back in place. The fuel line happened to be in these little holders. I think this was in this. And I think I just have to add some oil, connect the battery, and fire this bad boy up. Okay, so I've got everything hooked up back here on the engine, and I want to point out that this plug that plugs in and it goes under the frame, and this plug that connects to the engine, they are the same kind of plug. So I made the mistake of plugging that into that and this into this, and I was having some electrical issues. So make sure that those are plugged into the correct spot. So I got some 48 ounces of fresh oil in the thing. We'll turn the key, and I did have it running, so there we go. Oh, we got one headlight out. All right, very good. So we got one leak fixed, and I'll put the motor back on this thing and then get it back to the owner and rock and roll. Thanks for watching.